Welcome. This is another short video about another lesson on clinics, that is the syndrome of depersonalization and derealization, which we will call here Depe Dere, just to make it short. And this is the first of the clinical identity crisis syndromes. For the main point here is not so much the energy movements or the reactions to what is happening, but the first series of symptoms, that is identity crisis. This is always true for a psychiatric crisis, but in this kind of syndrome, it is the main issue. The depersonalization, derealization syndrome are all centered with the loss of being yourself as a person, the understanding, the seeing, the happening that you are not so identified with the me, the body, the mind, memories, relations. You're not the me anymore. You're more something new, something unknown, something unconscious maybe, that is more the self. So the me becomes confused, becomes lost, becomes demotivated, becomes apathic, doesn't find pleasure in anything, doesn't have any clearness, any memory, any normal perceptions, but rather new things happen. New perceptions, for example, connected with the different point of view. For example, you can lose your sight temporarily or see too vividly. That is the same for the hearing. You can not hear well, or you can hear too much, or you can also hear strange things. And from here to auditory or visual hallucinations, the step is very short. But here it is not so deep, so strong. We will see other syndromes like the psychotic dissociative syndromes, in which dissociation is stronger, and we don't have that intensity that we have with the energy related symptoms. So for example, head may be turning, sounds can be heard because of this energy activation, but more or less the person is still somehow not in crisis in the first field as the identity is. So we will see that in this energy low syndrome, in this identity main syndrome, we have a number of symptoms which are all related to not finding oneself anymore, losing the old regime, way of seeing, way of behaving, way of wanting, way of defending itself. You're somehow lost. So this kind of syndrome is interesting because also in all other psychiatric syndromes we may find some sort of identity crisis. It is transversal. It is not that, anorexia or drug abuse is not connected with this me not letting go of itself. We find this everywhere, but mainly in two main syndromes we find the identity crisis problem. That is the depersonalization, derealization area, which organizes more and more into what we call obsessive compulsive personality disorder and obsessive compulsive neurosis. That is the OCD. So we'll talk about this in this short video. We have, as usual, to see that the mainstream approach and the transpersonal approach differ as diagnosis, as prognosis, and as therapy. The diagnostic aspects in depersonalization are all considered negative. They don't see any good issue, any good aim in losing something which we are used to as it was a pathology, as it was something that should not happen. So it is reasonable that, for example, in the reactive aspect of the organization in the OCD, the therapist should try to put pieces together again. You remember the Humpty Dumpty small song? They try to put the egg together again, but they cannot succeed because once it's broken, it's irreversible, it's irrevocable, it's terrible. So this negative approach to the Depe Dere syndrome makes also prognosis and therapy as terrible as difficult. We all know that the OCD is a sort of black beast in psychiatry. Nobody can really understand it or cure it, and the prognosis is really very poor. And also, this is worse because this kind of patients also believe nothing can help them, and they don't come to therapy soon. Generally, there's a delay about 7 years before the syndrome is already structured before they look for help. And anyway, help cannot really help them very much because they try to go against this syndrome. They try to abate this obstacle. And this approach, which is general in medicine and in psychiatry, particularly works uh, very badly in OCD. On the contrary, in the transpersonal approach, which doesn't undervalue the resistances of the patient, they don't think that it is not a difficult thing, but they sort of indicate in the ego resistance, in the not taking one's responsibility, in denying the process, the main factor that makes people suffer. So we have to talk a little bit about this OCD, where the symptoms are mainly on the thought aspect, obsessive thoughts coming again and again, because they come to sort of destroy the ego image. So they uh, say all kind of negative things about what can happen if control is not put in place by the ego. Fear of losing control, fear of being contaminated and to die from sickness, fear of losing relations. So, on the affective side, also attachments which pathologically continue in time. Um, the order problem, which is a form of control. Uh, Pens must be parallel on the table, shoes must be parallel on the floor. Perfectionism and cleanliness are main issues in the OCD, but also sort of compulsive trying compulsively to avoid that kind of negative situations, which for the ego are something that must be avoided in all ways. You see, avoidance and control come in the same package. You control something to avoid it, and you avoid something by controlling it. Once they were one single pathology. So I was saying that this kind of symptoms all try to reconstruct the old regime, reconstruct identity, put under control the enemy, and so they are based on a dissociation between what is good and which is egosyntonic and what is bad, what attacks the ego. This dissociation cannot be cured unless the person is understanding that it is identified with this separation paradigm, which is against union, love, fusion, transformation, death and rebirth. What the Christian symbol, after all, says, because even people who don't have this pathology have a control zone they try to control, a comfort zone they try to control, sorry. And generally also on the big numbers, also governments have this same issue. They can either cooperate or make war one against the other because the separation principle prevails. So winning this battle in one's heart really makes the difference, in one's mind, in one's whole identity and personality. That is the issue. You cannot win without losing. Only by losing you can win. The me loses, but the self wins. So it is all an issue about power, about my will be done. And it is all an issue about truth, because what is true is that you are not against the world, you are part of the world. So this being contrary to everything is not true. It is a lie that you can really win. You cannot really be yourself without being with the others. And so there are strategies of this ego that doesn't want to give up, which are denial of being identified with this, that he's the source of the suffering. We have projection and manipulation. The other is worse than me. And all this is about not taking one's responsibility. And even if at the end responsibility must be taken by the ego of the suffering, then he will not pay anyone. He will be rageux. He will be angry. And nearby these people, we always see angry people, because you're not only not living in peace, but you're not living also the other person in peace. You don't live and let live. So the issue is about truth. Truth is that without love, you cannot go out of suffering. You can't go out of hell. If you don't renounce evil, you cannot get out of hell and start purgatory and then end in paradise. So these issues are spiritual, psychological, behavioral altogether. They can also have a physical, biochemical counterpart. Why not? Why should it not be that also on the material side, once you interrupt connections, also in the brain, connections could be interrupted, and you can see that the neurotrophy of the central nervous system is somehow modified by this approach to life that this kind of neurosis brings with it. We will talk more about therapy in the last part of the course when we will discuss the therapy of the OCD. But for the moment, I wanted to underline some of the aspects that we have with the loss of identity and reaction to this loss based on lying to oneself. And this is also true partly for the avoidance syndrome in panic attacks. They are, as we have said, cousins. They are form of reactions to a main point that awakening brings a subversion and an invitation to death and rebirth. And the ego is putting all its force, even though it becomes weaker and weaker, to counteract this. And this is the basis of the suffering in neurosis. Thank you. See you next time with a more heavy implication in dissociation. We will see the dissociative syndromes and the organization in paranoia. Goodbye.